Content warning. This episode includes discussion of real-world violence, including school shootings, the violent attacks on the U.S. Capitol, the Charlottesville attack, and acts of white supremacist-motivated extremism. These topics may be distressing for some listeners. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, this is Lisa, and I'm here with Kath, and we have a special guest today. So welcome to the Matriarchy, and I'm going to just pass it to Kath to explain who it is.
Sure. It is my absolute pleasure and honor to introduce Nora Neus. I will say right at the front, just in full transparency, that Nora is my niece.
I didn't want to give it away. I was like, oh, no, I'm going to let Kath do it.
But audience, hang in there because she is worth it. We might have gotten the inside lead because we're related, but trust me, you're going to want to hear this episode.
Absolutely.
Nora is an Emmy-nominated producer, author, and freelance journalist with bylines in CNN, The Guardian, Teen Vogue, Vice News, Political Magazine, The Washington Post, and more. Her multidisciplinary work is focused on some of our world's most challenging issues. Since she was a kid, Nora has understood journalism as critical for creating a more just world. She wrote her first hard-hitting news piece on the family computer entitled "A Local Boy Throws Corn at Sister." She was the sister. Her work now spans television news, documentary filmmaking, graphic novels, nonfiction, and podcasts. Podcasts, here we are. All of her people-centered storytelling aims to amplify marginalized voices and motivate change. Nora's passion for ethical journalism, did you hear that? Ethical journalism, so important, as a critical component of democracy has taken her from local news in Charlottesville, Virginia, to 6 years at CNN, including field producing in Ukraine at the start of the conflict in Russia. Now she's continuing her work as a freelance journalist, producer, and writer to reach adult and young people through national publications, books, and speaking engagements. She is the author of adult nonfiction books 24 Hours in Charlottesville, an oral history of the stand against white supremacy, and the forthcoming 24 Hours at the Capitol, an oral history of the January 6th insurrection. I can't wait to dig into that. YA historical fiction graphic novel Renegade Girls, A Queer Tale of Romance and Rabble-Rousing, and co-author of a middle-grade graphic memoir, Mohammed Najim, War Reporter, How One Boy Put the Spotlight on Syria. Nora also helps other storytellers reach new audiences through her media development and editorial services company, Longform Lab Media Group. She explores challenging issues through storytelling and a trauma-informed lens because ultimately her work is about hope for a more just world. So, welcome, Nora.
That sounds like a lot when you read it all out like that.
You've accomplished a lot.
I know.
It's important to celebrate that.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it does sound like a lot because it is a lot. You know, we're just talking about adulting, and I've seen Nora grow, from, it's my brother's baby, right? So I've had the privilege of watching Nora grow up, but you're still not that old, right? And so you've accomplished a lot in your years. So this episode, like the Hudson Bay Girls, is very personal for me. I vividly remember being at my mom's house in Virginia, who's Nora's grandma, with a whole mess of cousins, because we come from a big family. And Nora orchestrating a family newsletter. It was called News.
I love that.
I would run around and interview everyone.
Yeah, even the little ones. Like, I think my oldest was like a toddler, and you're like, ah.
Yep, sounds about right.
And what were you, about 9 or 10?
Yeah,
maybe?
Kids in elementary, middle school used to call me Nosy Nora. And that was a dig. That was for sure meant to be an insult. And I took it that way. But it also was very accurate. And I think it was my way at family reunions of trying to figure out what was going on with everyone.
Yeah. Well, we need that.
Yeah, we do need
and what's
that.
fun is my little cousin, the only other girl cousin who shares my last name, is now kind of carrying on the mantle. And so she's been writing news, which has been fun.
Oh, that's very fun.
Yeah.
You've started something.
Yep.
So It's interesting to me that you have spent, even from a young age doing journalism and, just your curiosity. I call you curious, Nora, not nosy, Nora.
Okay,
It's maybe
I'll
not as
take it.
literal.
Yeah.
But you were not on the journalism path in college.
No.
Not at all. You were really more into policy.
Yes, I was really into politics and policy. And I always had this interest in journalism as kind of back burner in a way. Like I was on the school newspaper and, I was editor of my high school newspaper. But I had this idea, I think very wrongly so, that journalism was somehow like watching things happen and politics and policy was like doing the real work. And I wanted, in a very serious way, but also very kind of cliched way, to like make the world a better place. And I like really meant that. And I really wanted to help people. And I felt like going to politics or policy was the way to do that. And I was going through college during the Obama administration when we were all very hopeful and very excited about the path of democracy and this new, what felt like a new hope, pun intended. But it was toward the end of my time at UVA, University of Virginia, where I went to school, that I had 2 internships my last summer of college. One was with the Department of Health and Human Services under President Obama, working on Medicaid special populations. So the saying in the government is poor and. So in order to qualify for Medicaid, you have to be poor and. So poor and old, poor and an immigrant, poor and pregnant, something like that. And like that's the language that the government uses, which I think says a lot. I know, right? Like there was something even in that moment where, I don't know, it was an interesting realization. And I really loved this internship. And at the very, very end, I had spent the entire summer there working on this proposal that had to do with breast cancer screening. And I made some offhand comment as I was leaving my last day of this internship and said, oh, I can't wait to see if Congress passes this proposal. Like, it'll be so cool to see where this ends up. And my boss said, well-meaning, said, oh, it's never going to pass. And I said, wait, what? And they were like, oh, yeah, no, I was interning in the budget office. They were like, yeah, we're going to include this in the budget proposal because it's like a priority of the Obama administration, but it's never going to pass. Like, there was never any chance of this passing. That's why we gave it to you, the intern, which also, like, right, that makes sense. But I had spent all summer working on this proposal, and we had debated I had been in these meetings debating the intricacies of, like, what age should mammograms start and all this stuff. And it's just, they're like, oh, it's just never going to happen. And I was like, right.
Did it, like, burst your bubble?
It really kind of did, because it was paired with, that was on a Friday, and then I started my second internship of the summer because I was an overachiever. My
Clearly.
Yeah. And my second internship of the summer was at CNN. And one of my very first days of work, it was my third day of work. So this is like not even a week later. We did this big story about a hospital in Florida whose infant neonatal cardiac surgery program was under investigation because basically all these babies were dying on the table in this one West Palm Beach hospital in Florida. And these mothers and parents had been trying to raise the alarm about this for years, and nothing was really happening. And HHS was aware, and there was at some point conversation about withdrawing Medicaid subsidies, exactly what I was working on at HHS, but that's just a thread, and then you have to get approval, and there's like a whole thing. At CNN, we aired the story, my third day of my internship. Babies who have heart surgery at this hospital from this doctor die. And we found factually that their death rate was 3 times the national average. And we aired that story. And the next day, the hospital and the program, the doctor were put under investigation. And within a week, the program was closed and the doctor had been suspended. And who knows how many babies' lives had been saved. It was just this moment of, there are other ways of getting things done. And it doesn't always have to be through, like, traditional power or through, not that CNN isn't powerful, because it is, but it doesn't have to be always through being the politician and policymaker. I think it was that day I decided I was going to shift my whole career. And then thank goodness I did, because how politics went after that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Exactly like you said, there's a lot of ways to make change, and policy is really important. And sometimes you need an external influence to get it, so journalism is one way, grassroots organizing, putting pressure on politicians. But I'd like to back up a little bit, because there's a really good story on how you got from policy to journalism.
How I got to that internship to start with?
Yeah, so I just love the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang origin story. So can you share that with our audience?
Yes. So the reason I had 2 internships that summer, other than being an overachiever, was because I had this internship at HHS, and I was going in to meet with my new bosses. And I was really early because, again, overachiever. And so I was killing time talking to my dad, your brother, on the phone, on the lawn of the Capitol building. And I had just finished a summer interning, or 2 summers ago, I had interned at the Capitol building. So I knew the Capitol really well. I gave tours. That was a big part of my job.
Oh, cool.
And so I knew which benches were good, and kind of out of nowhere saw this contraption that ended up being called a gyrocopter, but it basically was like a lawn chair strapped to a propeller. And this guy landed this flying contraption on the lawn of the Capitol building. And I'm there alone. I'm looking around, and no one's there.
You don't see that? Did anyone see that?
Yeah, truly, what? Because and the thing was flying. He came out of the sky, and a couple more seconds passed, and then I turned again, and I was like, Dad, this weird thing just happened. And I turn and see on the roof of the Capitol building all of these snipers pop up. They had been there, but they just, were hidden. And all of a sudden, these massive groups of armed police that I think now probably were Capitol Police, but at the time they just were men with guns, come running toward me. And at this point, I'm between the men and the guns and the gyrocopter man. And my dad on the phone was like, run, just run, get out of there, hang up and run. I don't like the sound of this. Which, fair. It turned out to not really be a threat. The guy was an irate Florida mailman delivering 535 letters about campaign finance reform, trying to do a stunt to get media attention to, for his issue. He was literally a
finance
US
reform
mailman. Yeah.
That's a good issue.
That was his pet issue, yeah. And so he flew his gyrocopter, and I was one of the only people that saw it happen. It turned out that the Iraqi prime minister was giving a speech in the Capitol building right behind me for a joint session of Congress. It was a huge deal, huge amount of extra security. The Florida mailman didn't realize this, picked a bad day. And so that's part of why it was so intense afterward. So the whole Capitol was on lockdown. It was this whole big issue at the Capitol, which is funny now that I'm writing another book about an attack on the Capitol. But this guy was arrested. Everything was fine. The whole thing was done within 40 minutes. But back in the day, this was the kind of thing that would rate top of the news. And Anderson Cooper at CNN invited me to be on his show. And so I had met a CNN reporter on the street, and one thing led to another. And so I said something in the interview. He was like, can you describe what the gyrocopter looked like? And so I described it, and out of truly just it came to me as I was saying out loud. I said, yeah, well, it looked like something out of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Just the way it was a little lawn chair with a propeller on top. And he cracked up and thought that was hilarious. And he said on TV, and he's told me since, he just was wait, I thought you were a literal child, but you're referencing this movie. And I said something oh, my parents raised me right. My dad was made sure I, saw Chitty Chitty Bang Bang as a kid. And then the interview clip went viral. Again, it was a slow news day. So people on the internet started calling me Gyrocopter Girl. And then in my ear, I was wearing an earpiece, which again, I had never worn an earpiece in my life, but in an earpiece, this other man's voice pops into my ear after the interview's done and just says, how old are you? And I was like, are you talking to me? Who is this? And he said, well, that was really great. I think you have a future in TV broadcasting if you want it. Would you like to come intern for Anderson Cooper this summer in New York.
Oh my gosh.
Damn.
And me being me said, well, I actually already have an internship that I've committed to, but I could do the second half of the summer. I could probably split my time. And so that's how I ended up having my HHS internship at the beginning, the first half of the summer. So like I also had gone into HHS knowing I was going to do the CNN internship and kind of that could be something different and weird, but like I kind of thought it would be interesting to like learn how the other side, how the press like functioned, and then I'd go into politics still.
Yeah, I think that's such a great story, and it to me it kind of shows like you were in the right place at the right time, but the way that you handled it is like there's this opportunity, there's something happening, and you're the person that runs toward it, right? And like kind of taking the opportunity and just kind of seeing where it goes, right? So
I'm making nepotism jokes here. It felt like that kind of showing up at CNN, being the gyrocopter girl who had the viral video, who showed up halfway through the summer because she had another internship. Like, and I also didn't help myself. Like, I showed up in like jewel-toned, modest dresses every day, like looking on air ready, just in case someone was gonna throw me. Like, like I definitely was like really aggressive as a 21-year-old. At that point, I turned 21 by the summer.
I
hadn't even. I was still 20. I was still 20 that summer, yeah. So I dressed the part, but like I took that to heart. And I was, I had some incredible mentors, and some of my peers were not the biggest fan of me showing up, which I like now as an adult understand why. But I felt very, like I didn't want to be the gyrocopter girl. I just wanted to like earn my place,
Yeah.
It took years for people to stop calling me that and like seeing me that way,
Oh, good luck after this podcast comes out.
Yeah. But it's funny, like when you ask that question, that's not the first story I tell anymore. Like when you ask like, how did you become a journalist? I told the other true version of the story, which is like my internships, which is like what solidified the moment for me. But I don't go to gyrocopter story immediately because now I can see it the way that you've described it of like, it was all the building blocks of who I am that have like made my career a success now. But at the time it felt very like imposter syndrome,
Yeah. I can understand that, but at the same time, I don't know, it's important to take advantage of opportunities when they come your way, and also like holding the ladder down. Is that the right expression? But like, you're not
helping the next person up.
Helping the next person up. So how people get to positions, there's all kinds of crazy stories. Like not everyone, like no one's going to have a chitty chitty bang bang story. But there's nepotism in a lot of places. And, I worked with people that, I don't know how they got that job. But because and I was like, oh, daddy, because once they got there, they didn't know what they were doing, right? It was the equivalent. I remember I had a boss once that she said, can you like take out this piece of audio or whatever? And so it was already mixed. And I said, no, it's already mixed. And so I basically had to tell her, like, look, it's like I had red paint and blue paint, and now we have purple paint, and you're asking me to take the red out. And she was like, what? And I'm like, this is the most basic thing of my job, and you're my boss, and you don't understand that. Like, I lost a lot of respect for her. But I've also had people who they're in that position, and they never say how they got it, right? Like, they come in, they do their job, and I think that's what's important, is that you fight through these imposter syndromes because they saw something in you, even if you didn't go the normal path.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, my that first internship on Capitol Hill that I mentioned, which is why I knew the Capitol, I got because my dad knew someone, 100%. Like, that's just, I got this internship because my dad knew someone. And my last day of that internship, I was 18. It was my first year of college. I was 18 years old. And the, like, young guy who was my, like, intern coordinator on my last day of that job said, I really thought I wasn't going to like you because you were because your dad knew someone, right? Is how you got this job. And I was like, yeah, I didn't realize you knew that this whole summer, but sure. And he's like, so I really didn't think I was going to like you, but actually you ended up being like the hardest working and best intern here. And there were only three of us, but I like remember this so clearly. He was like, I like really, you had to do extra to like, in my mind, which I didn't even know, but you had to do extra in my mind to like prove that you wanted to be here, and you ended up always being the first one to offer to go get the congressman coffee and stay late and whatever. And I was like, oh, okay. So like privilege absolutely plays a role, and also like working hard.
Well, it's how do they say it? Opportunity meets preparation, right?
Yep.
And
People love saying that to me.
but I think it's true for everybody, right? I mean, to
Yeah.
some extent. So obviously, you found your voice very young. What do you attribute that to? Like, who were the people in your life, especially the women in your life, that sort of modeled that for you?
My mom was a journalist before she had kids. And what's so funny to me is that I never saw her in that way. She stopped working when she had me. She was actually going to go back to work when I was a few months old and got me dressed for daycare, had a job to go back to. When I don't remember the specifics of the story, but like got in the car or like I was almost to daycare and she just said, I'm not leaving her. Like, I'm not doing this. I had been really preemie and very sick. They weren't sure I was going to survive in the beginning. And so my mom was kind of like, screw it. I'm not going back to work. I'm going to like hang out with my baby, which thankfully she was, financially able to do. So by the time I was conscious, she was just my mom, but she was always the person who had the news on, had newspapers around, was reading the news, was talking about the news. We had a rule in our household that I think was born more out of my dad working late and my mom desperately needing help, but that I had to be in the kitchen at 6 o'clock. And if dinner wasn't on the table, I had to be in the kitchen at 6 o'clock. And my options were to watch my little sister or help make dinner. And at 6 o'clock, my mom would also turn on CBS News, which is where she worked. And so I don't think it was even entirely intentional. I think she just wanted to watch the news and also really needed help. And I was like 10, and she could make me come down and help. But it turned into I watched CBS Evening News every night as a kid for my entire childhood. She also listened to BBC Radio a lot because she had studied abroad in Scotland, and so had gotten used to BBC Radio. And so I still, when I get like a little homesick, even though I don't live that far away, I still will listen to like the BBC podcasts because it makes me think of like after school in my childhood kitchen. So my mom was a big part of caring about the news and thinking that the news was important. There's a reason at 8 or 9 years old, when my brother was throwing corn kernels at me during a family dinner, my solution was to go into our computer room, because this is like 2000, and write a newspaper about it and hand it out. And I was like, this is how they'll pay attention to me.
Yeah. So it's kind of surprising that, if you were that active in your family life, already reporting, that you didn't consider journalism. What was...
I think I did. I mean, so it was that, and then, the high school newspaper, college newspaper. But I think, I don't know. Now I can go back and tell an arc that connects all the way to childhood, but I think in the moment it didn't. I was into a million things. I also was super into flute. I mean, I started playing classical flute when I was 4 years old, and was deciding whether to go to conservatory or college. Like, it was that level of dedication. I also was really into fashion design. I had like a random fashion design obsession, which if you saw how I dressed, you'd be shocked. But I got very into like sketching and designing, and got a sewing machine and a mannequin, and had my own fashion line. Like, I was always doing like a million different things, which still is kind of a theme of my career. But I think journalism was just like one of lots of things I was interested in.
That makes sense. That does make sense. And you studied policy. So that's obviously a much deeper dive into the issue than maybe journalism originally looked like it was going to offer. Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm going to skip ahead to a different question, because we just talked about like your wide variety of interests. You've worked in a lot of mediums. You've of course been in broadcast journalism, you've written print articles, you've done YA fiction and graphic novels and oral histories. That both of these oral histories are, like by many accounts, the definitive study of modern day history. And you've also had a recent role as a co-producer on the PBS documentary Kissinger. So you must never get bored. Or maybe you get bored and that's why you do all these things. But how do you decide what project to work on? Like, is the story the driver, the medium, or is it like, are you challenging yourself to use like a different method of storytelling?
That's an interesting question. I think probably subconsciously that's part of it. On a more practical level, I think it's like whatever sounds interesting and fun at any given moment. And the advice I always got in my career, even as a young kid, like, oh, if you really want to be a professional flutist, you should give everything else up and focus on flute. I mean, people were telling me that when I was like 10 years old.
Wow.
And pick something and be the best at it. And my parents told me that a lot, coming from a good place of like, you can do anything you want in the world. We don't care if you become a doctor or a chef or whatever you want to do, just like be the best at it. And I think I took that a little bit too far. At times. And what I kind of came around to is I actually don't want to pick a lane. I actually don't want to just pick one thing. I don't want to just do YA novels or just do graphic novels, just do CNN, just do documentaries, just do breaking news. Like,
That's a lot.
I mean, yes, but like I like having a million different expressions for the same like thing, which is story. So yeah, I mean, that's why I think like it looking at it from the opposite perspective, a lot of my ideas will start with something I've read. And so let's say I've read something about some interesting true crime story from history. Then like my question is like, then like what of the variety of mediums do I go with? And then also like how to do that ethically and morally. And if it's something like true crime, that's actually like a very complicated question. And then it's like, well, is this a short thing or a long thing? Is this an article? Is this a book? Is there some kind of like unique video aspect that makes it a video? There's just some kind of unique audio aspect that makes it right for audio? What's the market wanting right now? Which like changes and depends both in publishing and in writing and journalism. And sometimes it's just the opportunity that comes along. PBS asked if I would produce this Kissinger documentary, and my degree from UVA is in history, and a lot of my work actually comes back to American history. People have started calling me a historian, which I hesitate to claim just because I don't have a PhD in history. But like I am kind of starting to do more and more work as a historian and doing archival work, and so it usually starts story first, and then that dictates the medium.
Yeah, the idea of story, I think that's where Lisa and I kind of fell into this podcast, is the idea of like sharing stories, and that when we share stories, we can break through the noise and people can connect on topics through story, right? So to me, I think storytelling is so important. Like, tell me about your perspective on like how you, because you shared not only your own story, like here you're sharing your story, but you share a lot of stories. What's important? What's the driver? Like, how do you take care in presenting that?
In presenting other people's stories?
Yeah.
I think like there's a lot of responsibility in telling somebody else's story. Yeah. And so making sure to get it right, but also respect their like process and agency in telling their own story. And that was something that at CNN I started to actually kind of like bump up against, which is that I was always telling other people's stories, trying to do so, and I think mostly successfully, in an ethical and moral way. But something that I've been really intentional about, and leaving CNN was a very key part of it, was working with other people to help tell their stories in a way that gives them agency and also like a financial stake in whatever it is that we're doing. So, for example, I did this big story at CNN about this young boy, Mohammed Najm, who you mentioned in the intro, who was a young 15-year-old boy in Syria who was documenting the horrific airstrikes and attacks by their own, brutal dictator president on their civilian neighborhood by taking selfie videos on his bad cell phone, like not an iPhone, like a bad old flip phone, taking these videos and posting them online. And so I when I was working at CNN, stumbled across them and some other research I was doing.
Interesting.
And we ended up publishing this big piece about Muhammad. And so it was called like 15-year-old combat reporter, shows the world the massacre. And again, like kind of by not happenstance, but by a confluence of the story got delayed and the editor who was supposed to do it was delayed. So it ended up posting way after we thought it was going to. It happened to coincide with the largest period of deaths in his specific neighborhood and like area. And it was on the front page of the New York Times that day. So like all of these like other things coalesced where that story went viral. He became incredibly famous, became internationally famous, but also became a target of the Assad regime. And so he and his family were targeted. There was an airstrike directly on their street. Some of his family didn't survive. He did. Up until that point, I had done really good reporting that I stand by. And I'm so grateful that CNN published that reporting. But up until that point, I now had the best story of my career. And he was buried alive in an airstrike because my story published. Like there's a difference there.
Yeah.
And my bosses at CNN told me to move on. Like don't get worked up about it. Don't get too personal about it. Because like for good reason. I mean, if I got so attached to every single one of the stories I did, spoiler alert, I did, and I quit. But I got so personally attached to all of my stories I did. Like I felt, and in this case, like super responsible. Like it literally was because I wrote this story that his family was attacked. So like it just felt very personal. And so I stayed in touch with their family, and I ended up basically breaking CNN rules and protocol by helping them escape. And they ended up escaping into Turkey. And I ended up going to visit them and spent time with their family. And again, like up until that point, I have like not really literally cashed in on the story, but like I have all the, I'm the one who broke the Muhammad story, and I'm still young and at CNN, and it was a chance for me to prove myself as a real reporter after the gyrocopter thing. Like I was getting a lot out of this. And to be fair, so was Muhammad and his family. Like he wanted to be famous. I mean, he was 15 and posting videos online. Like he wanted to be famous, but he also wanted to raise awareness about what was happening in Syria because of his reporting and our story. Like there were more eyes on his community of Eastern Ghouta, which is a little suburb of Damascus, basically. So he was getting things out of it too, except that also he was a refugee, like desperately trying to survive. And that power dynamic started feeling really weird, especially because it's his story and his bravery and his work. And there was like an added element of him being a journalist too, that was like, we're literally doing the same job.
Yeah.
And yet
a lot of personal risk. He had personal risk.
Enormous personal risk. And there's a policy with CNN, and this is a whole other conversation, but you're strongly forbidden at CNN and like media from paying sources. And the reason for that is that you don't want to incentivize them coming to you with some crazy story that's not true.
Yeah.
And a lot of other things. So again, at this point, like he's gotten nothing from this other than risk and exposure, which can be good and bad. Anyway, so I ended up, we decided to write a book. I had wanted to write a book since I was a little kid. That was another thing. Since I was a really little kid, I was always writing books that were like 12 pages. And I asked Muhammad if he wanted to write a book with me about his story. And this is a vast oversimplification of the next 5 years, but we wrote a book about his story and about me and about the reporting and what happened because of my reporting, and then how he and his family survived beyond that, and ended up being able to share the byline. So the book is by Muhammad Najm and Nora Neus. And all the money, at that time I was still working for CNN, so I had a paycheck, and so all of the money went to him and his family, and he and his family, 6 kids and their mom, were able to live off of that money for almost 3 years.
That's awesome. I mean, that's, incredible, to be honest, that you did that, because you were faced with your bosses, like the people who've been mentoring you, who are telling you not to do those things, right? But you're...
And I will say, Anderson and like his EP and like that crew were very supportive always.
Yeah.
And they're very like human first, but it was kind of like the larger
The corporation. So
yeah.
But to be so young though, and to buck that's amazing. Like your moral fiber is strong. Of course, I believe that, knowing Kathy. It's the whole family, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, it goes to how we started. The introduction is ethical journalism, and I'm just going to move us along a little bit. You've been at the forefront of a lot of breaking news stories. You've interviewed Heather Heyer's mother, who's the victim from Charlottesville. We talked about Muhammad Najam, the young survivors in Uvalde. Like, oh my God, my heart just went out with that coverage. These are such like heavy, heavy topics that must weigh on you personally. And I know that you have a commitment to help people tell their stories with like insight and compassion. This is not easy work. And so how do you stay grounded? Like how do you not burn out? And also, what do you wish people knew about these subjects?
Yeah. I mean, burnout is a huge problem in the world, capitalism, but within journalism. And especially somewhere like CNN. I mean, for the last 3 years I was working there, I was on a 2 a.m. to noon shift. I mean, like, that's burnout central right there. And there are all the aspects of working a high-powered job that you're never off, and I was traveling all the time. I mean, the Uvalde story is a good example where we got a phone call. The shooting happened in the morning, Texas time. We didn't know how bad it was. I was getting dinner at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon so I could go to sleep, so I could be awake at 2 a.m. to do the show. And got a phone call saying there's a plane leaving in 45 minutes that you need to be on. And raced to the airport. Uvalde is quite outside of San Antonio, 2 hours. Got in a rental car. There was a lightning storm. Drove through the night. Landed at like midnight. Drove until 2 or 3 a.m. The road was flooded. There was lightning literally cracking on the side of the road. We had no service. It was just me and my boss, like, taking turns driving because we were both getting like so fried. Also trying to like get information about what had happened. We rolled up to the school, like to the crime scene. Like the bodies were still inside. Like we were outside, the police are still there, and, we're setting up our camera equipment, and we had to go live that day. I think it was at 4 a.m. Eastern, so it was 3 a.m. in Texas, and then went live and did our show. I was producing, so I wasn't on TV at that moment. Then we left, and we were supposed to, at like 8 a.m., we were supposed to go and interview one of the girls who was in the classroom where everyone was killed. And she was one of 4 survivors. And the last minute, her mom wanted to cancel because the little girl was too terrified of men. Because the shooter had been a man and said, we don't want any men. And my boss was a man. My boss was John Berman, and he was supposed to interview her. And so I said, absolutely 100%. And the mom, like, don't worry about it. Fine. And also, like, most people at CNN and most people would be a little bit more, like, trying to convince people of that. Like, I already had reached the point where I was like, I'm not going to pressure this kid. Like, she just witnessed something horrifying. But the mom said, yeah, it's kind of a bummer because Mia really wanted to explain what she saw. Like, Mia, like, felt really strongly that as part of her, and it's been less than 24 hours, but that she wanted to, like, explain what happened so that maybe this wouldn't happen to someone else. And I said, well, I can come over. I'm a woman. I can come over if you want and, like, hear her story, thinking it wouldn't go anywhere because that's not how TV works. And because she didn't want a camera either. But I went over and got the whole story, and we talked, and I thought maybe that would be it. But they'd given me permission to share anything, and I went back and talked to my boss and talked to the team at CNN. And after spending the afternoon with her family, wrote this story, went back on TV, and then it was me on TV giving the reporting, telling the story of what this little girl Mia had told me. So I haven't slept in 36 hours. We're like out at the crime scene, also like in a different time zone in a different part of the country. We're also like, I wasn't planning to travel. Like, I'm like, is there food in my fridge spoiling? Like, it's like all that kind of stuff. This little girl is in 4th grade, is telling me about how she, I mean, I almost don't want to go into all these details, but like, is telling me how she like put her friend's blood on her face so that she would look dead, so the shooter wouldn't shoot her, and that's how she survived. The next day, 2 days later, President Biden quotes my reporting in his national address on gun control.
Wow.
And I ended up in Uvalde for a couple days and then just left. And then it was Memorial Day weekend and everyone was like, okay, peace, bye. And I went to the beach. Like it's so
Whiplash.
jarring.
Yeah.
And then you just never talk to these people again. And so that's another example where I quit CNN a year later, and the first thing I did was I went back to Uvalde and I spent time with that family and I spent time with that little girl, and ended up writing this whole big feature story about how they were doing 1 year later. But if I'd been at CNN still, I wouldn't have been able to do that, just because there would have been another breaking news story,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love this more it's the name of your company, right? It's long form lab, right? So you're telling more long form, more in-depth stories, and sort of building that connection and these relationships. So it's not just like the, breaking news. Lisa and I just interviewed someone. She's like, I've had breaking news since I was 11.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad that you're in able to tell these stories in an environment that it feels from the outside more peaceful
My gosh,
for you
yeah.
and yourself, to take care
I
of your
remember
own
going
self.
to family reunions even 5 years ago, and just before the pandemic, which was really when I was in the height of a lot of, well, even post pandemic. And I just remember having conversations with you on a hike where you were like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No, not really." Yeah, it's much better now.
It's hard not to take this personally.
And I think
It's what makes you good at your job.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say I think if you're too callous and you're not taking any of it personally, then it's you don't want to lose your humanity in that also.
Yeah. That's so important. Well, to dovetail into your new book, before we get there, speaking about being in the right place at the right time, I guess going back to your Chitty Chitty Bang Bang story, you went to UVA, and about a year after you graduated, if I'm getting the timeline here, you can correct me, but you happened to be in Charlottesville. And that is when there was Nazis that were roaming the streets. You just happened to be in the middle of this. You were new at CNN, and you wound up sort of anchoring that, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience?
So to fill in the gaps a little bit, I finished my internship at CNN, decided this is what I wanted to do with my life, went back to school for my last year at UVA, and then got a job as a local reporter and fill-in anchor for the local TV station. So I'm on the side of the street with a microphone this house is on fire, or there's a can drive tomorrow. And Charlottesville is market 183, or else it was then, one of the smallest markets in the country, making no money. Again, I have no training, and I'm one-man banding, which is what you call it when you are responsible for filming, for editing, for brushing your own hair, and then going on TV and explaining whatever the news of the day is, times 5. You're doing 5 stories a day. And my last year in that job, we had been covering this kind of heightened move that started as a story about removing the Confederate statues in Charlottesville, of which there are very many. And over about a year, this blew up into a national issue with the removal of statues in New Orleans, but also from our local perspective, a very heated contest. And the local Ku Klux Klan got very involved, and the local Virginia. A couple different groups, the Virginia Flaggers were one, a couple different historical groups basically opposed the removal of the Confederate statues to the point that they were able to use and justify not removing them with a Virginia state law that said no memorials to war dead can be removed. So it became this big will they, won't they about removing these statues, but then really it became much, much bigger. And this is what happened, but Charlottesville became kind of the flashpoint in a national conversation about neo-Nazis, and because we started having neo-Nazis come to town and do rallies. Then the KKK did a rally, the literal Ku Klux Klan. I mean, I used to have to call the Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard for a comment, and sometimes his wife would answer the phone, and they were always very nice to me, but it's the literal I can't emphasize enough the literal Ku Klux Klan. On their voicemail, they're you've reached the Ku Klux Klan.
Oh my God.
I cannot emphasize enough. And so this was all kind of broiling and happening and getting really. We also had the first ever black vice mayor. I think it was the first ever black vice mayor. So this was all becoming. It was all tangled up together at the same time that it was Trump's first year in office. So there's a lot happening. The mayor of Charlottesville declared Charlottesville the capital of the resistance, which was a nice thought, but didn't help with the national kind of backlash against that city in particular. So I'd been covering this for a year. I covered the Blue Ribbon Commission to talk about the statue and the future of the statue, this growing protest movement, this far right, which at the time we had no idea what that was. I mean, I didn't have any idea what that was, the idea of the far right. And I remember very vividly conversations in our tiny little newsroom in 2016 about, are we calling them, they call themselves white nationalists or white sympathizers? Should we be calling them white sympathizers? They're not Hitler supporters. Is that a Nazi? And it's we weren't equipped to be having those conversations.
Yeah.
I mean, I was 21 also, but it was a wild time to be trying to report on that, and then also the triple homicide out in the country, and also the can drive. That was my daily stories. And so there was an opening at CNN. They offered me my dream job. I'm from the New York area. I could go home. And I had this choice of do I see this through? Because at this point, this group of neo-Nazis, white nationalists, white sympathizers, which I say in enormous air quotes, had picked this date for a rally, August 12th, 2017. And so I kind of had this moment of, really? Oh, I never put that together. I guess I knew that, but wow, that's unfortunate.
That's,
right? Well, I'll never forget your birthday. And so we knew this date was coming, so I had this kind of personal choice of do I finish the narrative arc of what I've been covering for the last 2 years, or do I take the dream job at CNN that's going to pay me 4 times as much and be near my family and help my career? And so I picked going to CNN. I felt there were other people who were going to
choice,
cover. But... I mean, it felt hard at the time, and I moved up. I moved up in my tiny little car, and I had a bunch of boxes left in Charlottesville, and I needed my dad to drive down with me and help me get them. And the one weekend that worked for both of our schedules was the weekend of the riot. And my apartment was slightly outside of town, so I felt fine going, and just knew I wasn't going to go to the riot. I wasn't covering it, so I wasn't going to go, but I'd be in town. And so basically this riot was scheduled to take place, and before it even started, it was the largest gathering of white nationalists and neo-Nazis in modern American history. It became extremely violent very quickly, and it was declared an unlawful assembly before the slated time that it was even supposed to start. Then the enormous amount of counter-protesters from all over the progressive community, progressive clergy of Charlottesville, who'd come out to oppose the white nationalists, were kind of celebrating in the streets after. So this is done. We think the story is done. They're celebrating in the streets, and a neo-Nazi rams his Dodge Charger car into a crowd of people in the street, killing Heather Heyer and injuring, we think, 24, probably more people. And then I get to town, and it becomes obviously kind of immediately a national story. But 3 weeks earlier, I had been the local politics and crime reporter for this town. So I knew every cop, I knew every firefighter, I knew every single source in town. Not everyone even knew I'd left. I was running into the vice mayor, who was wait, did you quit? But you're here now. I thought maybe you decided not to leave. People were so confused to see me. And again, it was I was in the right place at the right time. And called my boss, who at that point was the guy who was in my ear a year previous, and said, I'm here. I know everybody. Like, who do you want? And I booked him the mayor. I booked him the vice mayor. I booked him the mother of, I went out and found the mother of this victim, Susan Bro, who is like one of the most incredible women. And I also am still in touch with her. I was there for like 2 days, and I ended up field producing, which is like a very high level. That's the highest level I ended up getting at CNN. But I ended up as like a associate producer, field producing Anderson Cooper's coverage of the Charlottesville riot in 2017. And then a few days into it, President Trump made his now infamous comment that they were very good people on both sides. And that kind of like sparked a whole other cycle of coverage. So I ended up being down there for over a week. And it was a really hard time, but a really rewarding time to actually get to report that story. I was so worried about like missing the end of that story, and it was like rewarding in a hard way to be there.
And then that turned into this oral history, which is sort of now this series, right? Like, can you tell us a little bit about the progression of that? What made you write an oral history too, and not cover it in a different way?
Yeah, I think the next couple of like months and year, the narrative of Charlottesville changed really quickly, which was like kind of how you described it, which is like I think how the national like media, national, you know, consciousness remembers it, which is like for the rest of us, we were having a nice day in the middle of August. It was a quiet news cycle, and all of a sudden these neo-Nazis come to Charlottesville and protest and riot, and someone's dead, and if you were in Charlottesville, which is a very small subset of people, but had been paying attention and covering this, like it was the culmination of a year of effort.
Gotcha.
And
okay.
that I was constantly explaining to people at CNN.
Okay.
And so and this is around the time I was still in the middle of writing the Muhammad book, but I had a literary agent at that point. I knew I wanted to write books. I knew that was like maybe something I wanted to do long term. And I had so many sources. I mean, I knew everyone, it felt like, in Charlottesville. And the people I didn't know knew who I was. So it was like easy to, you know, start conversations with people. As a kind of side note, being a local news reporter in a small town like that, it's like you are famous in a small town. I remember one time I was in the grocery store, and they had a huge selection of wine on like deep discount at the entrance. And so I was like, okay, I'm sure I'll help myself to like quite a few bottles of rosé because it's like right at the front. And then I get to like the produce section. So I have a cart full of wine and nothing else. And this like older woman, like, Nora Neus, it's so lovely to see you. We love watching you on TV, blah, blah, blah. Looks in my cart, looks back up at me and goes, having a bit of dinner, are we? Like, I could not go anywhere in Charlottesville. So like, it felt very natural, and also I think was a way for like me to make sense of what happened. And so I had this idea of writing a book that was the story of Charlottesville, but told in the voices of the people who were actually there. So like, not the national reporters, not me even, who wasn't there. Like, I was in the car for a lot of that day, and I was not there during the attack. Yeah. But in the voices of the people who actually were there and whose stories I had heard. And I had read this incredible oral history piece a few years earlier by Garrett Graff, who's one of the best oral historians of our time, called The Only Plane in the Sky, about 9/11 and what it was like on Air Force One. And my personal routine was to read that every year on 9/11. And that was the first time I had ever read like an oral history format. And the immediacy of it and the like fear of it and like thriller aspect made me like understand and appreciate what it must have been like to live through 9/11 as part of the president's staff on a plane on Air Force One. That like that never would have happened, but like I felt like I was there. And so that was the kind of the feeling I wanted to replicate for people who were watching CNN, watching national news, saw what happened in Charlottesville, but didn't necessarily understand the depth of what was happening, and the fact that this was not some
like an isolated incident.
Yeah,
right?
there was, and like the two people who organized it, were both neo-Nazis. Both were UVA grads. Like, this isn't some random thing. Like, this is, I mean, Charlottesville is the home of Thomas Jefferson, who built UVA with enslaved people's labor. I mean, Charlottesville as a city was built through the labor of enslaved people. Like, there's a reason there's Confederate statues all over town. Like, this is not an anomaly. This is part of the history and the story of Charlottesville and of America. And so the kind of tie there is, I wrote the book came out a few years later, and then January 6th happened, the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. And for a lot of people, it reminded them of Charlottesville. It's the same kind of scenes, same kind of imagery, same shocking display of in-person animosity that we've seen online or we know is out there, but it's different when it's concentrated like that. And then for those of us who cover extremism, it was a lot of the same people, like literal people. It's a lot of the same men who were on the streets of Charlottesville. They had escalated in their rhetoric and radicalism and leadership positions in some of these organizations, and they were the ones sieging the Capitol. So my book came out just after that, my Charlottesville book, and all anyone wanted to talk about was the connection between Charlottesville and January 6th. And so I spoke about that in every interview I did for the Charlottesville book. People asked about January 6th, which makes sense. I mean, it's one story, basically. It's the story of the far right in America. And there's been so many books written about January 6th immediately. I mean, it's shocking. Like 6 months later, there were books about January 6th out. It was kind of crazy. So I, for a while, thought there wasn't a place for me to contribute anything. Like, I wasn't an expert on January 6th. I am now, and I will say, like, I do feel like an expert on January 6th now. But I had this realization that the oral history format actually could work really well to tell the January 6th story in a different way, and to tell the story of how we got from Charlottesville to January 6th. January 6th, also not an isolated incident. Says a lot about our past, but also says a lot about where we are now. Yeah. And so now it's work of history, but it also feels like a lot of omens for what has occurred now in this second Trump presidency, which he was not reelected. I mean, I wrote the book 2 years ago. That's how long publishing takes. So I did not know he would be reelected when I wrote this book. It was actually, my first draft was due Halloween, the Halloween that was 4 days before, or 3 days before the election day. So I had to rewrite the last chapter, but it was a different, literally, yeah.
So, talking about the January 6th book, what surprised you most when interviewing people?
Two things, I think. One, and this is feedback that I've gotten from people who have read early copies of the book, which is really nice because it means it came through the way I wanted it to, which is like, it's way worse than we think it is, or thought it was. Like, it's way worse than we know, and it was way worse than we knew. Like, the level of attack, the level of brutality, the kinds of injuries, the kind of violence. I mean, I'm interviewing this photojournalist who is a war correspondent, and the only reason he is there is because it's COVID, and so there's travel restrictions. So he would be in Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria, but instead he's at the U.S. Capitol, and he's crying on the phone, reliving it, having almost like a panic attack, telling me how 3 years later, 4 years later, he can't sleep at night because he's remembering men coming toward him with nails punched through 2x4s and then using them as clubs to jam the nails into people. Like,
Jesus.
And that's one story. It's like, it was so much worse than any of us know. And also, people on the outskirts of the crowd had very different experiences. There were kids, there were grandmas, there were lots of other people. So it's also true, like, it's hard with an event that large, where, like, that is his real, true lived experience. And also, there was someone on the outside of the crowd who can honestly say, I didn't see any violence. Everything was fine. And, you know, we were just there for a tour. Like, some people felt that way. And that's not entirely genuine because, like, I mean, they obviously weren't there for a tour, but, like, we never witnessed any violence line, it can be true for some people. And cell phone service entirely went down. So a facet of it, of the conversation, of people's remembrances that day, is like this idea of like fog of war, that at every door, every group of people at every door on both sides thought that was like the last Rubicon. And even after the building had been breached, 2 hours later, at the other side of the building, there was this massive battle where Michael Fanone, you might remember, the DC police officer, was beaten, where Roseanne Boylan, one of the rioters, was killed, was trampled and killed, basically. That's a longer story that's in the book. They all thought they were actually fighting for the door to the Capitol. They didn't realize it had been breached 2 hours earlier. So you have Mike Fanone coming out and these other, officers and the photojournalists and like all these people in that melee that I'd interviewed, and they were like, we just barely saved that door. That door didn't get breached. And then we find out a different door had been. So that's one very many things. The other thing that I would say is I was shocked at the compassion I came away with for some of the rioters, which I was not expecting.
Yeah, tell us more about that. That was what I was going to ask you.
I did not. So I didn't interview any. I interviewed one kind of adjacent person, but I didn't interview any rioters myself, mostly because I didn't have to, because the DOJ and the congressional committee that investigated January 6th released every single page of documents of every single interview, every testimony, every deposition, every court case is online. Now, a lot of those documents are no longer available because the Trump administration has removed them. So,
did you make copies?
Read my book if you want to.
Okay, you gotta.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I have copies. But you could also buy a new book coming out soon. But
Pre-order now.
Yeah. I've read thousands of pages of these documents, and some of the rioters absolutely were hardened white nationalists who had been on the streets in Charlottesville, who came armed. I mean, there was a whole little group of white nationalists that had what they were calling a quick reaction force of like extra weapons and a boat across the river that they were going to like bring in. I mean, some of these people there's like no excusing it. And not that I'm trying to excuse some other people, but there were definitely quite a few people who said, who weren't necessarily very well educated, who weren't able to parse out what was the truth and what were lies, who felt that their president was telling them that their election was about to be stolen, and told them to come on this date and time to DC because he was going to do something. Will be wild was the phrase. And so there are all these people. I mean, there was this one grandmother who went with her stepson, her daughter's, I think it was like her sixth husband, because she wanted to bond with her new stepson. He had been a cop, and so she trusted him. And she got caught up in the crowd and made her own adult choices. And I'm not, she shouldn't have done what she did. And she has now disavowed her participation, but ended up following her son-in-law into the building and breached the Capitol and was part of the demonstration. And she has said since, like, she is responsible. She made her own choices, and I'm not trying to, like, there's a nuance there that, like, I want to be careful about, but, like, she now blames President Trump. And a lot of people in that kind of position of, like, our president told us to do this thing. All the chants of 1776, like, people genuinely thought this was, like, their revolution. And again, not everyone, but there was a large contingent of people there who thought they were doing the right thing. And that is kind of hard to wrap my head around.
And they still do, by the way. They're still, like, I mean, that's,
But I think that's, like, an interesting part of, like, the partisan, like, the whole, like, how do we end partisanship? How do we end whatever? And, like, I don't have an answer to that. But I do think there is something, assuming that everyone on the like, other side, or assuming that everyone is acting from a malicious place or from a place of bad intention, it doesn't help anyone. And I think often, like, obfuscates what's really going on. Granted, there are a lot of people who are just, like, hateful, evil, racist people. And, like, that exists too. But, like, there are people I love that support President Trump who are not bad intentioned, but who are ill-informed, or who have made a decision to be okay with certain things to get other certain things, you know, like not everyone is coming at it from a bad intentioned place, but that doesn't remove the responsibility for understanding how your support of this man and of this administration impacts other people, and the kind of reign of terror that we're seeing now.
So what's your hope for the outcome of the release of 24 Hours at the Capitol? Like, what is the best case scenario? And an adjacent question, too, is, you know, here at the Matriarchy, you know, we fully support democracy, right? We're pro-democracy. So I'm also curious about, like, where do you think the state of our democracy is? And maybe even more importantly, what can people do to protect it?
Yeah. I mean, I think my biggest success is if no one sends me any death threats and I'm not doxxed and my life continues to be the same as it is now, which is like, I'm joking, but I'm like not at all joking. Like I have a security team and I'm having very real conversations about like what that looks like if something blows up. No, I think my best case scenario is that people understand how bad it really was, how close we actually came to the insurrection working at multiple points throughout the day. And then continues to like...
That's insane.
I mean, yeah, that could have been my other answer to your last question about what surprised me. I mean, it so could have worked. I mean, the fact that it didn't is actually shocking. Like, it's actually shocking. And it's only through a lot of bipartisan cooperation among the highest levels of the Democrats and Republicans who were in this off-site location in this military base where they had been evacuated, coming together and figuring out what the solution was. And some of the Republicans in that room were Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell, who people in that room have told me in the moment were like, you know, completely anti-Trump, completely anti what was going on, was appalled, said they would never support the president again. And then, of course, we know that they've completely gone back on their word. That's an aside, but an interesting part of the book where, you know, I interviewed, sorry, this is such an aside, but I interviewed Nancy Pelosi's daughter, who was like in her 40s, I want to say, a documentary film producer. And I say her age because she was there with her son, who at the time was, I think, 13. He was the only kid at the Capitol. One of the only kids at the Capitol that day, like really in the midst of it. And she was telling me about how January 6th really radicalized him to be very fearful and like very anti-Republican specifically.
Interesting.
And I kind of made some like comment in the interview, like, well, that makes sense. Like, I can see how, like, if you think your grandma's going to be killed, like, and she said, no, it wasn't any of that. That was scary. But like, no, it was sitting in the room, seeing all these Republicans come together, hugging me, telling us everything was going to be okay, coming together to like call on the president to get rid of, like, to tell them to go home, coming together to make a plan to go back into the Capitol that night to certify the election, and then weeks later say, oh no, it was just a tour and nothing. Like, it was the Republicans going back on their word that for this kid was the thing that like just shattered.
And he was
his
like
worldview.
13, yeah.
Yeah.
What would success have looked like on the other side? You mean like breaching actually, like?
Well, I mean,
I don't know.
one,
Worst
killing
case scenario,
someone.
Right? Like,
I mean, killing Pelosi or Pence. I mean, there were quite a few that were almost killed. That like genuinely, like, if the hallways had been organized differently. Oh, Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney was inches away from counting rioters. So like that would have been a success, quote unquote. Just disrupting the proceedings. I mean, there was a lot of people said that night we shouldn't go back into the Capitol. We just need to they need to literally clean up. One of the big things the white nationalists were doing and the rioters were doing was smearing feces around the walls of the Capitol. So like literally they had to clean the building before congressmen could go back in. And Nancy Pelosi and Republicans agreed at that point that it was important to go back that night and certify the election that day, although it was technically the 7th. It was like 3 a.m. by the time they did it. So that it wasn't a success. It couldn't be called a success in terms of delaying.
What's your takeaway of the state of democracy, and what can people is there hope? You say, hope is in your bio. Do you feel that way?
Not every day, not in every moment. But overall, yes, I think I do. And
Okay.
I think it, again, comes back to stories. And rewriting history is a key point of fascist autocratic governments. Rewriting the history of January 6th is part of that. I mean, there's a law in Oklahoma that's on hold right now, but may go into effect, saying that high school teachers have to teach high school students that the election of 2020 was rigged and that January 6th was a valid action. Yeah. I mean, so that just makes books like this, and not just mine, but like reporting on January 6th and talking about January 6th, especially as its 5th anniversary comes up, really important. It wasn't a no big deal thing. It wasn't this little thing we should all like stop talking about. It was like a major insurrection and a tipping point for American democracy. When American democracy prevailed, it didn't feel like a success, but it was. I mean, the system, the system, air quotes, worked. And I think telling the story and talking about what this administration is doing now is very important. So I do feel hopeful that it's up to the people to be having these conversations. What worries me most, I think, is like suppression and censorship of these conversations. So it's important to acknowledge what happened and observe things like the 5-year anniversary.
Yeah. And sometimes suppression looks like an alternate universe. I mean, yes. I think that's how we somehow reelected this guy, right? We reelected this guy after having all this information, partially because, like to your point, you talk to these folks and they have different information. They believe they're well informed. They just have different information. Yeah. So, yeah.
It's quite scary. Yeah.
So what does the matriarchy mean to you?
I mean, it means relationships with people like you, Aunt Kathy. Like, it means like the women in my life that have formed the scaffolding for like my success now. It's like you and my mom and your mom, my grandmother, and people who have been there throughout my life and made it possible for me to do this work. I never honestly think about being a woman. Like, it's never like, oh, being a woman in the workplace is so hard. Like, I was prepared for that, and I had a lot of those hypothetical conversations in college, and I definitely have been lucky, I think, in my workplaces that I haven't faced like outright sexist discrimination. But then it's like having conversations with my grandmother, your mom, about what a crazy fact it was that she got a math degree in university, and like the options that were available to her like not that long ago, and the scaffolding of support and history that I'm really grateful for, which I think is like part of why I'm a historian, of like we're all only able to do this because of work that's come before.
I like that. Yeah, I totally agree. That's beautiful.
Well, your generation gives me a lot of hope, and the generations after you too. I do think you have to choose hope consciously and every day, and just being an active part of democracy. So I'm sharing stories. So thank you, Nora. It was such a pleasure. I was so excited to record this one.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to see you potentially in person next year.
Oh, yes. We have to plug that. Nora's coming to everyone from Michigan. Listen up. In, we think April. Date TBD. Nora's going to do her Michigan book launch, hosted by the Matriarchy.
Yes. So
hosted
if you want to attend, reach out to us. Get yourself a ticket.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate your support.
Oh, we appreciate yours in return, and it was a true pleasure. Thank you, Nora.
Well, that was very, very interesting. I'm sure she's probably got so many stories. Oh my gosh.
Oh, so many.
She'll have to write a book about all her experiences one day. But she's too young for that. She's got to get a whole bunch more. So eventually,
Yeah,
she will.
she's packed a lot in her lifetime.
She
but
has.
yeah, maybe a memoir like to add to her
Someday.
list of mediums, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
but
And I liked what she said about that, about how she chooses her mediums. I thought that was really interesting. Something to think about for us.
Yeah, no, I think, because stories can, like, what's the most successful way to tell a story?
Right.
Sometimes it's a graphic novel, and sometimes it's a
Right.
video, and sometimes it's a short story, right? Like,
Sometimes it's a podcast.
sometimes it's a podcast. Nice. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, of course, I've seen Nora grow into the woman that she is now. But even if I weren't related to her, I would still find her interesting and impressive and like a strong moral fiber. Which
Yeah, for sure.
I
Oh my
can
gosh,
see
for
how
sure. Yeah.
I can see how journalism like probably is just like you see on TV. It probably does chew people up and spit people out, and it I think you need to have these different like seasons, like we talked about, and like different chapters of your life, and then it layers on top of each other, right?
Absolutely.
Like matriarchy.
Yeah, like matriarchy. Well, I mean, I think,
Yeah.
exactly. This is totally new for us, and we both have done, different things in our lives. And as my mother always would say, life is long. And you can have these different seasons, which is great. And that to me gives me hope. I mean, there's a lot out there going on in the world, but that also has its seasons, right? Our political seasons, our cultural seasons, all of those things. So things ebb and flow. They always have. Just seems like we're really in an ebb right now, but I trust flow is coming.
You and me both, Lisa. Yeah, this was interesting to me, and I did read 24 Hours in Charlottesville. I have not read her new book, but I did pre-order it. But I think one of my takeaways was this story kind of, even the Charlottesville one kind of did appear. Like, oh, what's going on in Charlottesville, right? But it was a lot of building blocks to get there, and it, like she mentioned, it's January 6th didn't happen in a vacuum either. It was the continuation of these forces. Yeah, really interesting to put that all together. For someone like on the outside, I'm not, I mean, I follow the news, but not like that.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not in that world.
And you could go even farther back.
Sure.
Far right has been working for a while, and
you can go all the way back.
Go all the way back. But I mean, there's gosh, what is the name of that? There's a podcast that Steve Kornicki did about Newt Gingrich and and how he came to power. And it's really interesting. It's really interesting to go that far back and sort of look at the forces that came in that sort of drove the Republican Party farther right. And it's been the long haul, right? And so now it's given power to these what we used to think of as alternative type groups, right? The KKK and some of these white nationalist groups, but they've, given that they have friends in a major political party, it's given them a lot of force, and I think it's helped with their recruiting, and we see where we're at now. So,
I choose hope. I choose that this is the last gasp, we were on such an upswing for a long time, I mean, not always, and certainly I come from I'm a white woman. I come from a privileged background, right? I haven't experienced this like a lot of people have, and I know that. But I feel like the needle has been moving for a long time, and sometimes it's not linear, right? It's up and down. But I really hope that this is just people flying their freak flags, and I see cracks in the system. I saw this really interesting video today about all these cracks in I'm just going to say it, in the MAGA movement, right? And who knows what it'll evolve to, but I think we're in the process of watching it morph. And I don't know, all we can do, like, I got to back up a little bit and just, take in my corner of the world and try not to get overwhelmed by the state of affairs, and just you got to keep trucking. You got to keep experiencing joy. You got to, raise your family. You got to stay in community. You got to
all
move
the things.
needle ourselves.
Yeah.
All
I
the
mean,
things.
I have 3 daughters, and they have asked me, should I bother? Should I bother going to law school? Should I bother with this, like, attacks on women and everything? Of course, yes, you should go. 100%.
Yes,
have to keep, we have to keep
Someone's
pushing
got to
forward.
fight against this.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can't. This falls right into hope. We can't give up the hope that we're going to keep moving forward. And I think we will. I think if you look at history and in the long haul, we are always moving forward. Sometimes it doesn't look like it. Sometimes
doesn't
it's
feel like
what is it,
it,
the 2
yeah.
steps back thing, right? But
Yeah.
hope is important.
I mean,
and
At
it's
least
hard
it's not
sometimes,
unlike
though.
raising kids, right? Like, day to day, you don't notice, and then you look back and you're like, how does my baby have a full beard, right? Like,
Mine don't, by the way, Kath.
But you look
I
back
would
and-
be okay with it, okay?
To each their own. No body shaming here. But sometimes you have to look back to see how far you've come, and then you have to celebrate
That's right.
how far you've come.
That's right. And yeah, very much so. And I'm often reminded, as a woman who went into engineering in the 80s, I'm often reminded of that. And just being a woman and like watching like how much, women have moved forward in our lifetime. But it's just so hard to see them try to pull it back. So, but
It is.
we keep pushing, and we keep, that's why you need hope. Because if you don't have hope, you're not going to push, right? You gotta have the hope. So
I was just curious, like, my recollection of January 6th, it'll be one of those moments that I'll never forget. I dropped my kid. I'm curious about yours too. Like, for my story is I dropped my son off at the gym, and then I was just going to wait it out and bring him home. And I heard what happened on the news, and I was like, I just turned my car on, and I had to go see it for myself. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I got my other kids off the computers and whatever they were doing, and I'm like, you got to look at this. Like, I don't know if it meant anything to them, but I'm like, you need to witness what's going on in real time, because it was so shocking. It was so shocking. And, thank God that it wasn't worse than it was. But it was, we cannot afford to underplay the significance of January 6th.
And I don't know why we have, to be honest with you. My spidey senses were up just because I'd been listening to the president's rhetoric. Because of my advocacy, I knew what local MAGA type Republicans are doing in terms of ordering buses, busing people there.
Okay.
So, it felt like something was in the air. So we had the TV on all day. Like I was working from home, and I wasn't working. I was like glued to it, and watching the president. On one end of that, I don't know what they call that, but where he said all the things that he said, and it was like, he said what? Wait, he said that? Like, what is he? And then watching the march to the Capitol, and then just watching them climbing the walls, and like it was like, wait, well, and nobody could stop it, and he wasn't stopping it, and then the whole timeline
He didn't choose to stop it.
He didn't choose to
He didn't
stop
choose to stop it.
and so just watching that timeline and praying that he will do something, right? And then I think he finally came out with a tweet or something that was, not enough, obviously. And then, okay, I just want to, the one thing I remember, and I didn't see it that day, but the biggest thing that always will strike me about the good guys on that is, do you remember those women, the young women, carrying the voting records? And like when it all happened, they picked it up and they took it to safety, these suitcases. And I was like,
they were like the interns or something.
They were the interns.
Right?
They were so young. And
they were like little Nora.
They were like little Noras. And I was just like, oh, like these heroes. Oh, we should get them on the Matriarchy. Could you imagine? That would be amazing.
Amazing.
But yeah, that's the thing that like always struck me. But then also all the other shocking stuff, like, you know, of the noose and for Pence and everything. And it was just, and to imagine that 4 years later we reelect this person. I'm sorry. It's just how, like, clearly we did not talk about January 6th enough. That's what I've come to, because if nothing else, there's a lot of other stuff that we can argue about, like politics or whatever, but come on, like there's just, anyways, I keep freezing. Yeah. So
it is, it is mind-boggling that we're where we are. And I do think, like you had mentioned, earlier, is that we're living in different realities, like
we are.
Yeah.
And that's what's
there's
so
one
scary
reality, where they downplay January 6th and like, oh, it wasn't that bad. And it was interesting, Nora saying, I could see actually why they would say that. Like, I was there, it wasn't that bad. And I'm like, what do you do with that? Like, I mean, I guess two things can be true.
Well, and they truly,
just because you didn't see it.
I mean, if you remember, it's we don't talk about QAnon as much anymore, but like QAnon was like a huge conspiracy movement, really. And I mean, I went down that rabbit hole one day just to try to understand what people were seeing, and that's a whole that's a whole hour and a half conversation, because they're like, the psychology behind that conspiracy, it just grabbed these people. Like, it just grabbed these people in. And humans don't like to admit that they've been schnookered, right? So, I've been schnookered a few times, and I didn't like having to admit it. You feel stupid.
Betrayal is the worst feeling.
It is.
Yeah, and not to your community, like we're a tribal species, and we all think of ourselves as the good guys. Everyone's a hero in their own story,
for sure. We all want to do the right thing. We all want to do good, right? I think. I hope. Maybe not all. I'll take that back. Most of us do.
The vast majority. And that's we have to keep other people's humanity. We have to keep we can't call our political opponents garbage. And it's shameful that is being modeled. It is terrifying that states are purposely misinforming a generation of students on history. Because why would they think anything else? They're going to grow up and go, well, you're clearly lying. Like, it's going to be outliers that find this information. Maybe they'll come across Nora's book and go, oh.
Well, and that's, but see, I was thinking about that when we were still, and she was still on, is like, the problem is people who've gone down this rabbit hole of an alternate information universe, they would look at that book and say, not true. This is propaganda. That's the problem. Is like, and I agree that it's terrifying that the government in a state would try to, say you have to change the truth in your history classes, because that is the next step towards total fascism. But this alternate universe that's existed now for 8-9 years for people to get their information from. I mean, I'll make this a short story because I know we're going long, but, I knocked a lot of doors during the first administration, Trump administration, and, just talking to neighbors or whatever. And I met somebody who had voted for her and was a strong voted for him and was a strong proponent of him, even in, 2018. And when I started talking to her, she just had different information. Her views of everything. And she was a very intelligent woman, a business owner. But and we had a wonderful time. She was crying to me because her friends ditched her because they were not Trump supporters. And I'm like, hugging her. I'm like, I'm so sorry that happened to you. But in the end, I'm like, we just really have different ideas of what is happening. And we just sort of agreed to disagree at that point. But I don't know how you move people off of that when they've lived in that information realm, I guess. So
I don't. At that point, you just have to deny people's stories. If you read Nora's book and you say that's not true, you are literally saying that people are telling what happened from their viewpoint and saying they're lying, or it didn't happen that way.
Or that the author's lying. Yeah.
I guess, but why bother putting a book together interviewing people who are telling their stories? This is an oral history, right? I don't know. I don't know. The victors get to write history, so maybe one day, it's...
Well, and that's very true. That's a whole nother subject, because if we want to talk about... Has our government always been truthful with us in the first place?
No.
No. So
or withholding.
So yeah. But you said it 100%, that the people that write the stories get to shape the belief system around what happened. And that's why I think it's so important what Nora's doing and the work that she's doing. And I'm so appreciative. What a great young woman. Of course, she's got a great aunt. Not great aunt, but a wonderful aunt.
I think we're both very grateful to come from, the family that we were. And we are not a monolith, right? There's a lot of opposing viewpoints in our family, but, ultimately there's more love and acceptance.
Yeah, that's nice.
And I do think that cuts across, and that is something that of course we're family, that's a little different, but
yeah,
I do think you choose your family, and I think if we can, it's so hard, but if we can keep open to hearing people's stories, that's where I think we can be open to change.
I hope so. I have hope. I don't know if I have the answers, but I have hope. And I'm looking for answers. So I think that's one of them. I don't know if it's all of it, but I definitely agree that storytelling and listening and telling stories, we don't have enough of it, and so yeah. I agree. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
All right.
No, sure. And stories are entertaining, and it's community. There's, movies are still a thing because we like to go watch stories together, we like to go to the theater. It's different ways to express this anyway.
Great.
We appreciate Nora being here with us and sharing her story and the stories of many others. We thank our audience for still being here with us, and hope you appreciate this story and, comment on some others that you'd like covered. And don't forget to subscribe, help us change that algorithm to reach more people and spread matriarchy. And, and welcome to the Matriarchy.
Welcome to our community.